Hi, I'm Sarah McDevitt, and I'm introducing the new tools in Visual Studio 2012 for SQL Server and Azure database development. Nearly all applications leverage or rely on the database in some form, so we integrate the database and the database developer into the complete application lifecycle, leveling the playing field for all developers who need to consume the database. As you move your applications and databases to the cloud, these tools will continue to provide the most comprehensive support for Azure SQL Database by releasing updates to the tools alongside cloud platform updates. The full toolset, called SQL Server Data Tools, or SSDT for short, is also available as an add-in to Visual Studio 2010. The tools for both Visual Studio 2010 and 2012 will be kept in sync with updates released on the web. There are three main pillars of database development that we identify and focus on. I'll show briefly what these look like in Visual Studio 2012. The first, connected development, has seen vast improvements that significantly increase productivity when working via a direct connection to the database. Second, the database project system allows you to develop offline alongside application development with first-class language services for T-SQL and an isolated test and debug environment, which is especially valuable when developing for Azure. Finally, the tools use standard formats that are consistent across SQL Server and Azure tools because we provide a unified schema deployment engine called the DAC framework. You can multi-target a single project to work with different versions of SQL Server from 2005 through 2012 and Azure, and get platform-specific validation so that you can prepare appropriately for a successful deployment. Let's see a few of these things in action. I'm here in SQL Server Object Explorer in Visual Studio 2012. This is your central hub for all SQL database tasks. Whether you're dealing with an on-premise SQL Server or a database in Azure, you can start here. While I can develop directly against this Dinner Now database in SQL Server Object Explorer, for ongoing development, I really want to work primarily in the project system. So I can go ahead and create a new project directly from this database. As I give this a name and add it to source control, project creation will be kicked off. This database project type in Visual Studio 2012 replaces the database projects that shipped in Visual Studio 2010, and we do provide an upgrade path for existing projects. It's important to remember that the full tool set of SQL Server Data Tools is available for Visual Studio 2010, and this project type fully round trips, so you can work on the same projects and databases with team members who are on different shells. My project is created with source code representations of all schema objects in my database, and I'm ready to work. First, I want to record a snapshot of the database project as it exists right now. While I can do this in source control, I also have a database-centric way of versioning my projects. I'm going to snapshot the project, and this creates a single file representation of the entire database schema, and I'll call this the baseline. You can use this artifact inside SQL Server Management Studio, our command line tools, and Azure web portals to deploy schema. To facilitate team development, the database project system integrates with team development tools such as Source Control, Continuous Integration, and MS Build, and Team Foundation Server. Now, what I want to do with this project is deploy it to the cloud. In Project Properties, I can change the target platform to any of the supported versions of SQL Server. In this case, I'll choose SQL Azure. As soon as I do this and build my project, I see that it failed, and I can check my error list for SQL Azure specific errors in my project. By navigating to this error and quickly fixing it, the error disappears, and I can be confident that this project will deploy to the cloud. While I'm here in this definition of the table, I can see that I have full language services for T-SQL, including refactoring support, go to definition, and find all references. all of the language services you would expect from a first-class language in Visual Studio. Now, in order to be sure that my Azure deployment will succeed, I want to test and debug my project, but I want to do this locally. I'll use the existing Visual Studio paradigm to F5 my project, which will build and deploy to a local database instance called LocalDB. This is the local database runtime, which is a file-based system that provides you with a local, isolated database environment for testing and debugging. Now that my project is deployed, I can test and debug in an isolated environment with all of the debugging experience that you would expect in Visual Studio. So if I view code on this stored procedure, I can set a breakpoint, and I have an easy launch point to debug this procedure. This sets me up with some executional T-SQL so that I can iterate on this debugging loop. As I hit F5 to continue, we hit the breakpoint, and I can step through this debugging as you would expect. After testing locally, I'm ready to publish this database to the cloud. Instead of using F5 and the debugging loop to work with this project, I'm going to break out of the loop to use project publishing to get this project in the cloud. I'll enter my Azure credentials and kick off this publish. Since I can test locally by retargeting the project, I can be confident that this project is valid in Azure. Since operations in the cloud can take longer than locally, it's useful to monitor the progress of this publish in a new tool window called Data Tools Operations. This allows you to work on other things while potentially long database operations are running. Now that this is reporting success, I can return to SQL Object Explorer and view my database in the cloud. SQL Server Data Tools provides capabilities for SQL Server and Azure development that previously only existed for C# and VB, and enables application developers and database experts alike to bring their database development to the next level. Check out our team site and watch for updates at msdn.microsoft.com/data/tools. Give it a try in Visual Studio 2012.